Hello, guys, and welcome to another episode of Coco in the Sun podcast. I'm your host, Malika Critchlow. I'm happy to be here today. So I didn't do one yesterday, which is Wednesday, because I was just exhausted. For whatever reason. I wasn't excited to do it. I like to do it when I'm excited. But also I was like, oh, maybe I'm supposed to do it tomorrow because Thursday is the solstice, and maybe there's some message here in the book that's meant to come out today. I have no idea why. But I do feel like I can do it today, and I feel excited to do it today, to read the book, things like that. Can I say any insights I'm really getting right now is that we're heading, or I am, I believe, I believe heading into a season of blooming. Um, so I'm excited to see what the blooming is. I planted some seeds, right? Um, so I'm gonna try to enjoy the season. I'm gonna enjoy all the flowers and blooms. And that blooming attracting the next season and the next season, right? So this was like, I feel like this was the past few months was like a clearing, replanting, redoing the whole garden, putting in the plants that I wanted, the way I wanted it. This blooms and then it continues, right? From there, whatever blooms and flowers, the bees attracts, and then more blooming occurs, or the next cycles. This helps the next cycle be even bigger and better than the next and the next and the next and the next, and so it goes and goes on. That's what I'm getting. I just got that just now talking to you guys. I feel like, yeah, that's how I feel. So really excited for the solstice, embracing it and looking forward to the blooming that it brings. So we're going to continue now reading. Hope you guys have a really good solstice and you guys get what you want out of the solstice. What messages are you getting? What messages are you getting? Okay, so today we're going to read Siddhis and the Powers of Consciousness from the book. So I don't think the video is going to be long today, only because I have another Zoom meeting with this I found this other channel on YouTube. I think it's called the Angel Raphael, and she's in Scotland at, I forget where, but it's somewhere with 13 stones. But it was weird. So I have seen her stuff before and not really synced with it, but didn't feel any way about it. Then like this week I saw one of her videos with Mary Magdalene. Guys, I love Mary Magdalene, right? So I listened to the video. It was really soothing and good. She's doing some work with the chakras. It was like a channeled message from Mary Magdalene. It was so cool. And so one of her videos came off again yesterday, and it was talking about she's having a Zoom call today. She's in Scotland and she's, I think, laying some timelines and grid work. So the grid work thing, I wasn't too sure about like a few months ago, and I kept reading about it, hearing about it. I didn't know how that worked or what it really meant. The ley lines and what you're aligned with and where you feel like the grid work. I think that's just like focusing and giving love to those areas, right? And visualizing good things there, opening of channels and stuff like that. I don't have those type of visualizations yet, and I am happy with the speed of my progression. I am not, but Scotland really stood out to me that she was in Scotland, and she was at these stones in Scotland, and she showed us different sites that she visited there and what it meant to her and stuff like that. So if you don't know, I really love Scotland. I've been twice. Always felt called to Scotland. I love it. I just really do love it. My mother is a Campbell. And so that's where the interest started like years ago. But like when I was like 35 or 36, I really wanted to go and nobody wanted to go with me. And I just booked it to go, and then my friend came with me last minute. I was so happy. We were there for like 2 or 3 days. I really loved it. And then I went back a couple of summers ago with my daughter because I wanted her to see Scotland. So when this lady was in Scotland or whatever, I thought, okay, yeah, and I think this is the Zoom call for me. I think she's creating a timeline out of love and bringing it as she has a symbol, I believe that Mary Magdalene gave to her, and it's like interweaving all these different well, the infinity symbol has been coming in for me, and the infinity symbol I think is in the middle of it. Interweaving all these different things of love into this sort of web and the symbol at the 13 stones in Scotland. So there were a lot of synchronicities for me. So yeah, so this video is going to be kind of short because I think the Zoom is in another hour or so. And I don't want to miss it because I feel like it's something I'm supposed to be a part of. I'm excited to find out, like, what it's going to be. But that's how things work out, isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, so let's see. So I think Scotland, I'm connected. Scotland and England. I like London a lot too. I've been intrigued by Glastonbury. I haven't been yet. So, but I hope to go at some point, you know, uh, go back to England, check it out, check out Glastonbury, and go back to Scotland. But anyway, so that's why the thing will be short today. But so let's start. Okay. Cities and the powers of consciousness. The cities of powers of the cities or powers of consciousness naturally unfold as one progresses along the path of spiritual development. I was reading something today in an email from a sacred container I did a few months ago, and the lady that posted I think it was Instagram video. She was talking about how our powers of consciousness, I don't think she called it cities, but she did mention powers of consciousness, I believe, or gifts. A lot of time, she said it doesn't come to fruition because we don't feel safe. I also read, I got that too from somewhere else, like as a Blu-ray. Blu-rays find it difficult to access their gifts at first, because they would have had a lifetime where they were probably punished for the gifts or were killed for the gifts. And so until you clear that lifetime and it comes like you become aware of it or what happened in it, you probably not going to be able to bring forth those gifts. And so I've been like completely asking like what my gifts are. I'm happy with the progression I'm making, right? But I do have questions, and if they don't think it's for me to know my gifts yet, but to be of service, then that's fine. It's probably I need to do a lot more work. There probably needs to be some work I still need to do it myself, and loving myself and acceptance and understanding aspects of myself before that comes in. So they haven't showed me a lifetime where I had these gifts or I was punished or anything for it. So I'm still not sure. But that's the vibe that I'm getting. Yeah, like these gifts that you have, or cities or powers of consciousness that you've had in different lives, if it hasn't, if you're having trouble bringing it out this time, it's probably because you had a life where you were um punished or killed for it, so you don't feel safe in this life to bring it forward. So I think that definitely is something that may be occurring for me. I don't know if it's for anyone else. And I'm still having those dreams. But anyway, um, there are many well-documented cases of Buddhist, Christian, Islamic, Jewish, and Taoist saints and mystics who have attained these states. In addition, it is well known among indigenous cultures that shamans often exhibit such powers as well. I have personally made a study of cities for the last few decades. To the Western materialistic consciousness, some of these powers seem outlandish, but they have been well documented in numerous cultures. Several years ago, I had an experience with the city of a mystic in one of the most unlikely places on earth, Kodiak, Alaska. I had been invited to teach a workshop in Anchorage, and the following weekend I taught a workshop on Kodiak Island. After the final session on the island, I had a few days off. My organizer gave me a few options, and I chose the boat ride to a small island inhabited by Russian Orthodox monks where an Orthodox saint had lived. I was told that visitors, more often than not, had to turn back due to rough seas. In fact, I was told the prelates of the church in charge of the monastery had never been able to see it, as every time they went for a visit, high seas forced them back. This was a source of immense humor among the native peoples. We took a small airplane ride to a nearby island and landed on a spit of land that ended abruptly into turbulent and frigid waters. We were greeted by a local fisherman's wife driving a pickup truck, and I hopped in the back. My organizer got in the front. It was summer, but there was a light snowfall as we headed for her house by the sea. I remember feeling quite cold and wondering how in the hell people survived here in the winter. We pulled up to a small house surrounded by cedar trees and went inside. Sitting by a large wooden table, we sipped tea. Now, anyone who has been to Northern Alaska knows that time is a strange breed in these parts. We just sat and sat, talking a little here and there, waiting, it seemed, for some opportune time to leave. Finally, our host announced that it was time to go, and we piled back into the pickup and headed for the dock where her husband was waiting with a fishing trawler. We took off across an amazingly placid sea. Our host sat next to a boom, knitting and commenting how unusual it was to have such a calm passing. I sat looking out at the rich, unbelievably beautiful landscape of the neighboring islands as our boat chugged along at a fairly crisp pace. Seals followed us part way. Passing an outcropping of boulders, we came into a small natural harbor. The water was too shallow for the trawler, so we got into a dinghy and headed to shore. The scene was like something out of the Middle Ages. A group of men were on the beach burning bush, the air thick with billows of white smoke which swirled in eddies against a stark blue sky. The monks wore long beards, typical of Russian and Greek Orthodox clerics, and they were wearing long gray robes with thin ropes tied about the waist. Each one of them also wore a crucifix. Stepping out of the boat onto the land, we were greeted by someone who appeared to be in his early 30s and had the air of authority about him. Our host explained that I had come from Washington State to visit. The abbot smiled approvingly and proceeded to take us on a tour of the small monastery, which consisted of perhaps a dozen men or so. As we headed up a path into the shade of Siddhis, he noted that the monastery did not often get to host pilgrims. He took us to several spots, including the small hut where the saint had lived. I recall the air being musty from the old manuscripts and icons that had been in the saint's possession. But there was also an unmistakable sense of serenity. The abbot also took us to a sacred spring reputed to have healing powers. Finally, he took us to a small chapel where the saint had been previously buried. His body had since been removed, but the site was still considered holy. The abbot caught me staring at a corner of the chapel. He asked me what I was seeing. And I said I was seeing a column of white light coming out of the floor and going up through the roof. The abbot seemed to smile a bit and said that the saint had been buried in that corner of the church. Then he said something in a somewhat dreamy voice, as if he were partway into another world. I remember his words because they sounded so odd to me at the time. Would that we were all so sensitive. Seeming to rouse himself from his reveries, the abbot said, "There's one more thing I would like to show you." He guided us back down the hill to a very small chapel that had obviously just recently been built. It was quite unusual in that it was perhaps 9 feet square and some 20 feet tall. The inside of the building glowed from the gold pigments of recently painted icons. They depicted the lives of saints along with other prominent figures of the Russian Orthodox Church. In the back of the tiny chapel, there was a very small altar with a Bible in Russian. The abbot pointed out the various icons and their meanings, and then he said that the tour had come to an end. He motioned us out of the chapel and closed the door behind us. I remember suddenly having a question about mysticism. I thought the abbot might be able to clarify. I knocked at the door, but there was no answer. I knocked again, still no sign of anyone inside. Gingerly, I opened the door to find the chapel completely empty. For a moment, I stood in shock. Then, my ever skeptical mind came in, and I began to search for trapdoors and other entrances. I even picked up the small frayed rug on the floor to see if there was a secret exit. Nothing. Still in a kind of shock, I wandered out the door and out to the beach where the party was waiting. There, clearly in view, was the abbot. He was talking to my host, and as I stepped up, he nodded his head with a distinct twinkle in his eye. We boarded the dinghy and headed back to the trawler. The sun was low in the sky, and I stood on the deck looking over the stern as we headed back to the sea. I was very quiet. As I write these words, I find myself caught up in the feelings of awe and wonder I felt then. I had known that Siddhis existed, had studied the physics of them, and had made it a hobby of mine to collect stories and documentations. But here on a small island off Kodiak, a humble contemplative had, a humble contemplative had shown me the mystery of yogic powers firsthand. Halfway through the ride back, the fisherman's wife turned from her knitting and said, "You know they do things like that all the time." Things like what? I asked. "Oh, teleporting, bilocating, things like that." "Really?" I said. "Yes," she replied, not taking her eyes off her knitting. "That island is a remote place. There is no mail service. We see them sometimes in town picking up their mail and buying things." And she said in a most conspiratorial tone, "They don't have any way of getting there." The powers of consciousness or cities range from what are called the lesser cities to what are termed the greater cities. The lesser cities include such psychic abilities as clairvoyance, inner seeing, clairaudience, inner hearing, clairsentience, inner feeling, as well as clairgnosis, inner knowing, as in knowing something but not knowing how you know it. The first three powers, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, are refinements of the physical senses. As psychic powers unfold, they often first present themselves in one of these three forms or in combination. Thus, one might begin to see images in the mind that can't be physically seen. In other words, mental visual impressions. In scientific studies involving remote viewing, this city is most often used. Sorry, guys. Studies show that some people can, under right condition, example, mental relaxation, actually report visual impressions of objects or locations hundreds of miles away without any previous knowledge of them. The reception of such visual information must presumably come from some other source than that of physical sight, since the viewers were nowhere near the locations they describe. Many yogis, saints, and mystics have reported that they could see their disciples in distant locations when it was called for. In one account, the yogi named Karoli Baba suddenly asked for large amounts of food to be brought to him. Those present report that he consumed a mind-boggling amount of food before going into a samadhi, a form of deep yogic trance. When the yogi came out of meditation, his disciples asked him what had happened. He reported that he had suddenly seen one of his disciples dying in the desert. The last desire of the dying man was to eat. Baba said that the Chela disciple had reached a level of attainment where there was no further need to reincarnate. But with the desire for food on his mind, at the moment of death, he would have been brought back into the wheel of reincarnation just through the power of his one unfulfilled desire. Baba had taken upon himself the task of fulfilling the man's last wish for food, and using his yogic powers, he transmuted that desire. When psychic information is received auditorily, the person is called clairaudient. Such persons have subtle impressions of hearing, sound, and or voices. The inner realms of consciousness are filled with sound and music that can be incredibly beautiful. It has been suggested by some that many of the great composers actually heard the music of these realms, and this music of the spheres greatly influenced their compositions. Some individuals feel things at a very subtle level. These persons are called clairsentients. There's often a fine line between a clairsentient and an empath. Empaths have highly developed sensitivities and often feel other person's feelings, especially those immediately around them. Clairsentients may also be empathic, but in addition, they receive psychic impressions in the form of subtle physical sensations. Clairgnosis is one of the most fascinating siddhis. When you have a hunch about something but have no idea how you might know such a thing, this is clairgnosis. That is, if your hunch turns out to be true. If it turns out to be false, we call it delusion. Some have suggested that clairgnosis is an attribute of pure consciousness, which is by nature omniscient and omnipresent. Also, one rises up the ladder of consciousness. As one rises up the ladder of consciousness, one's own personal awareness takes on some of these qualities of pure consciousness, and episodes of clairgnosis increase. The lesser siddhis also include such things as healing abilities and limited powers of prophecy. This class of yogic powers also includes the ability of awareness to become very small or very large, in other words, not confined by the limitations of the body. The greater siddhis include such things as levitation, in which the body floats or hovers in air. Again, this siddhi is not confined to Indian yogis, as some believe. There are well-documented sightings of Saint Francis of Assisi, for one, hovering in the air. Saint Francis exhibited other siddhis as well. In fact, his physical remains still have spiritual powers even after his death. While visiting his shrine in Assisi, I was transported into the spiritual realms through the emanations from his crypt. I heard a sound like wind blowing through aspen trees, and when I stood near his body. And when I returned to my hotel room, my skin was red, as if I had a light sunburn. By the way, if you're ever at Assisi, here's a little tip. As you enter the main entrance into the basilica where St. Francis' remains are kept, turn to your left. Off to both sides, there are stairs that lead down to the crypt, and it's certainly worth visiting. The problem is that there are usually throngs of people milling about, and it is difficult to find a quiet space. If you proceed further past the stairs, you will see a large altar in the distance, the only one in this part of the church. On the floor, in front of the altar, there is a geometric figure. It sits directly above St. Francis's tomb, and the emanations from this area are very strong. No one seems to know about it, so you can stand directly on the spot and receive the emanations in relative peace. I should underline that. I don't think I'm going, but you never know. The greater siddhis also include such remarkable abilities as teleportation, like the abbot I mentioned earlier, and bilocation, being in two places at once. There are other abilities that fall under this category as well, but the purpose of this chapter is not to discuss the siddhis in depth. It is important to realize that the siddhis or yogic powers are attained as a natural consequence of spiritual development. There is, however, a very large danger with the siddhis. They have a glamour and a seduction for many people. The advice often given is to avoid the pursuit of yogic powers. And when they do arise, do not pay much attention to them. A short story about the dilemma of Siddhis will help to make this clear. This concerns a living yogi who is quite well known, so I will avoid using his name. And although he teaches Kundalini yoga, there are very strong parallels with the system of the Egyptian alchemy. He is quite a powerful being, and I had the wonderful experience of studying with him at a week-long retreat many years ago. According to a close disciple of his, who I came to know, the yogi had gone to India for a spiritual retreat in his early 20s after having attained some of the siddhis. He was resting against a tree, listening to the beautiful music of a master musician who was caught up in the fervor of bhakti, divine love. And due to the intensity of devotion within the music, our yogi was transported into a deep state of samadhi and experienced great ecstasies and bliss. The concert ended abruptly when it started to rain and the musician rushed indoors. Using his Siddhic powers, the yogi caused the rain to stop, and the musician returned to his kirtans, sacred singing. Very quickly, our yogi was transported back into samadhi, but his bliss was rudely interrupted by an old man kicking him on the side. The man was also a yogi, and in a fury, he continued to kick the younger yogi, yelling obscenities at him. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Don't you realize this area has been suffering from drought, and you stop the rains for your own selfish desires?" The ancient yogi raised his staff in the air and pointed it at his younger peer. "Mark my words, if you don't stop this, you will pay a great karmic debt. You will spend 1,000 lifetimes as a sea creature." The old yogi then kicked some dust in the direction of the young man and left before he could respond. Immediately, the young yogi went into meditation and through his Siddhic powers returned the rains. He fervently prayed to God to take away his siddhis, and miraculously they left him. But over the years, they slowly returned to a much wiser and less flamboyant man. I believe that the siddhis are a natural expression of evolution. They are perhaps one of our next evolutionary benchmarks, and anyone practicing internal alchemy long enough will eventually have to contend with them. The siddhis are to us like apples are to apple trees. Apples are intrinsic to the nature of the apple tree. But it is only when the tree reaches a certain stage of development that the fruits appear. Until then, they are only a potential. When an individual human consciousness reaches certain stages of development, the siddhis spontaneously appear. Every alchemical lineage deals with the non-ordinary powers that are attained as a result of spiritual practice. And every alchemical tradition has its own methods for developing and handling these spiritual powers. In the Egyptian stream, these powers were developed as a byproduct of strengthening the etheric double or ka. Okay, I'm going to stop there and then we're going to do the strengthening of ka in the next episode, which will be tomorrow. Yeah. This is such a long these chapters are so long. I have to break it up in like sections like this so I don't overwhelm myself. I do this and then I can see. What can I read tomorrow? Yeah, let's see. We'll see what tomorrow brings. But anyway, so that's it for today. I hope you guys have a great solstice. I think it works out too because tomorrow is the full moon, right? So we get to read on the full moon, and then we got to read today for the solstice instead of yesterday. So I think that's good. Um, Yeah, I think I got more of my dream last night, I think, of what I'm able to do, or one of my things I'm able to do, but I'm not sure how I do it or how that's progressive. Yeah. So I don't know yet. But we'll see how it all unfolds. I hope that this is the beginning of the blossoming of all your beautiful desires that you've been working on bringing into your existence, into your life, into the life and the world that you want to create. And I hope you know that you are loved and that you are loved and you take time and you're gentle with yourself. Yeah, really had a really weird dream last night. It's still sitting with me in a very confused way. I even Googled it and it told me what it meant. It's not like awful, but the dream was so like disconcerting. It was just like, oh my God, of all the dreams I've had, like, I don't know why that message was chosen to be like sent in that way, that understanding. Could we have not have done another way for me to understand it? Maybe not, maybe not. Maybe that would have stuck with me because it's still on my mind and I'm still like, I want to forget about it. Like, anyways, I hope you guys really, really take time with yourself and enjoy yourself and find out more about yourself and love yourself more, because that's going to just help you love the world more. Have a wonderful solstice, guys. We'll talk tomorrow for the full moon. Bye.